Munchkins, welcome back to my channel. It's Janet here. Today we are going to be talking about 5 of my favorite Dramione fanfics ranked by my own made-up system. So to determine whether or not I like them, it needs to fit a certain amount of criteria that I have decided that are important to me for it to be cozy, like a rom-com sort of vibe, not too sad, but something that makes me laugh out loud and just have a good time with a little bit of yearning. For first up, I rank criteria out of 10. The first one is there great banter between the FMC and MMC and of course the side characters? Making sure that there's no cliched or cringy word dialogue in there is important to me. The tone is humorous and it did give me a laugh out loud moment on a lot of the scripting between the characters and of course the way it describes the story. For a rom-com, for me, there needs to be a slow burn and a bit of yearning from the characters. That is very important for a romantic sort of fantasy novel. The love story is gushy and it gives you that like tummy tingle while you're reading it and maybe even gives you that little bit of giggling feeling as you're reading it through. There is a little bit of smart, a little bit of spice in there. It doesn't have to be a lot, but a little bit of that, because after all that yearning for them to actually get together and have a little bit of a spicy moment is quite nice to read. Of course, not all romanticies have storylines. Because this is based on the Harry Potter sphere, you would hope that there will be a bit of a well thought out plot. Bonus marks, obviously, if there is a plot. Obviously, if there's no plot, I can still enjoy it, but it will rank higher if there is a plot in there. And of course, adorable side characters that I love to hear about is important as well. So without further ado, let us go through my top 5 cozies. I'm going to start obviously backwards at number 5 and then we'll get to number 1. Obviously, this is not any criticism of the fan fiction novel. I don't think there is any right, as we've seen across the sort of fan fiction portal, to criticize people that write these books and stories for you completely free and just give it away. They're not professional writers yet. They don't have professional editors and all this huge marketing team. So if they do it out of the goodness of their heart, it's a little bit of indulgence for them as well. And if you find that you enjoy it, then that's great for you, but there's no need to criticize. And that's not what I'm here for. Not to criticize any of the books, but just to recommend my top 5s in case you want to get into fanfic. Obviously, the reason I got into fanfic is because I realized that a lot of these fanfic novel writers have now been given published books, and one of the top 5 that I really enjoy have actually had a published book that I've read, and I will review that in the future and do a comparison. But for now, this is purely fan fiction. Everything is good. Fantastic writing. Number 5. This fanfic is called Wait and Hope is the first book. It is written by Might Be Righty, and this explores the memory loss and love and rediscovery of love again. The story begins with Hermione Granger waking up in the hospital, and you realize really fast off the bat that she has lost her memory for the last 6 years. It's very, very specific of why 6 years. There is a reason for that. Later you find out why it's 6 years as you go along, but that's not really a huge part of the story. You just need to know that in these 6 years though, a lot of things have happened and has turned her belief of who she was to who she is now. It's a very different sphere. In those 6 years, she has ended her relationship with Ron Weasley. She fell in love with her mortal enemy, Draco Malfoy, and actually married him. And all she remembers is of him being a weasel and a brat when they were in high school. And when he obviously used to be quite racist towards her being a mudblood, obviously a person that is not of pure blood, and he himself is. So how did you get from that enemy sort of trope to now being lovers? And that's, I guess, a lot of the conflict. Initially, Hermione is has a lot of struggle with this new reality, because straight away, instead of her being able to go home and live with Ron that she used to date, she now has to go home and live with her husband, who is Draco. Despite all these emotional sort of turmoil and Draco now not being able to act like he normally would with his wife, he's still quite supportive and patient. But at sometimes, patient and being supportive is quite a drain on the husband that has to remember the love story and having to get his wife that he's forgotten up to speed. It brings Draco into quite a depressive state, I would say. And at times it is quite sad to see Draco in that state of mind. Generally, I like Draco being a little bit arrogant, very sure of himself, but not a sad Draco. The story then delves into obviously the evolving relationship through Hermione remembering her story of falling in love with Draco. The reader also follows along on that journey. Throughout it, obviously, there's friends around there. There's Ginny and Harry, who are married in this fanfic. In a lot of stories, they are not. But in this one, they are married and they're like her besties. And I feel like they're the light characters of the story because they're quite funny in their way of interaction. And they're not too serious when they banter around with Granger, which is kind of required because the story is a little bit heavy at times. Although Wait and Hope might have humorous moments, I do think it is primarily a dramatic, emotional love story, and the humor comes from basically Hermione reacting her new life. Sometimes, since she doesn't remember marrying Draco, there are plenty of awkward and funny moments where she struggles to reconcile her past memories and her present reality. Draco still at least has a dry, witty and sarcastic comments, which I find that is throughout a lot of the fanfics. That's the sort of personality that Draco Malfoy gets to have in a lot of the books. And when he's witty and being lighthearted, it does reduce that tension that you feel between him and his wife that he's almost lost, basically. The reason why this is sitting at my number 5, not because the book was not because the fanfic was not well written, but mainly because I was looking for humorous and laugh out loud moments, and I was not looking for anything too serious. And I would say out of the 5 books that I'm talking about today, 5 of the fanfics I'm talking about today, this one does give you a little bit more heartache and sadness than the other 4 that we'll talk about. The Draco in this story, like I said, is not my favorite sort of Draco that I like to see. He's more sad than his normal chipper self. He's normally quite self-assured and confident in all other circumstances, but in this book, unfortunately, he's not that because he's pining for this woman that just doesn't remember him. The memory loss trope that is obviously throughout this book is very heart-aching, as you're writing it mainly for Hermione's point of view, and you can only assume from the description that she's interpreting from Draco's reaction, he's silently suffering for the woman that he loves, but you never get his point of view, so you don't know if he actually is feeling sad or is feeling optimistic. But from the way that Hermione is observing and also feeling guilt-ridden about it, she always will interpret it in a slightly negative light, which is not my sort of flavor for these types of books. But I think the suffering that you hear from both parties, from their actions or from what they say, from their point of view, is done very well throughout this fanfic. And the frustration that they're feeling from the lack of memory, so like recollection, throughout the book is very well done. And the reader themselves will also feel that frustration, and like you're hopeful for them, which is why I guess it's called Wait and Hope, because you're hoping for them to hopefully get there one day. I think the plot is very cleverly done. The wrap up at the end brings everything together, especially even the way that each of the chapters are named. They're named in very particular ways and you're wondering why it's named that way, but at the very end it wraps it all in a very pretty bow, and I think that forward planning is very clever of that writer to do it that way. Even in when they give you little bits of pieces to hook you, which might not seem like an important fact, like the fact that Hermione has a mobile phone that she uses, like the one that Muggles uses, and they just mention that she's left it somewhere and she's not using it right now. But then you go, oh, why does that matter? But then at the end of it, you find that it's actually quite significant to give you that sort of loving feeling at the end. And I think those sort of little details in a story that's written, that's giving you facts. Also, they talk about the couch a lot. They have a green couch in their living room, and themselves, characters always refer to them, but you don't really quite know why until at the very end, and it wraps it all nicely together. I think all those little detail is very thoughtful of the writer for you. This story is great for anyone that likes to be a little bit sad. There are people out there that likes romantic books that give them a little bit of a sad feel, and then there's a happy ending at the end. So if you like that sort of vibe, this book is probably one of your more top-tiered Harry Potter fanfic between Draco and Hermione, but obviously not for me. All right, so let's go to my rating system and how I've rated each of them by my criterias. I've got first, is there banter between the two main characters and side characters? there isn't too much banter, I feel like, between between Granger and Malfoy, because they are two people that one is still thinking of him as an enemy, the other one's thinking him of his lost love, and one is always sad, one is feeling guilty, so the banter between them is not that strong in this book in particular. The banter, though, does occur between Ginny and Malfoy. Their insults are quite silly towards each other, but in somewhat a very respectful way. It shows that Draco is being welcomed into the Gryffindor fold, even though once he was their enemy. And you have the banter between Hermione and the whole Slytherin crew, because they all are friends in this book. And obviously Draco has his support team, Hermione has her support team, and they all seem to get along, even though she doesn't remember, but they banter really well with her and are quite loving, even though they're quite morally grey characters in the Slytherin crowd, which is what their persona of their personality generally is. They are very quite lovable and very sweet to Hermione. And then you have Hermione and Pansy. Pansy, who is like the cool fashionista queen here, the queen bee, with a lot of boundary issues, especially when it comes to Hermione and her fashion sense. And she's always happy to sort of infringe on her boundaries in order to get her back to her bestie way that they used to be. And then you've got Theo, who's always chaotic, and he's never a sad person, so he's quite cheery, and it helps Draco sort of pull him out of his like sadder state and brings the light into the story, I believe. You have Blaise, who acts like he sometimes barely even acknowledges the situation, but he's still Team Dramione with a secret agenda of his own in the story. From the bantering, I gave this a 4 out of 10 for the banter work. Then the tone is humor and made me laugh out loud. I would say I gave it a 3 out of 10 rating for that. Like I said earlier, this is more of a romantic drama than a rom-com. You'll get more tears than laughter in this book. Does the story have slow burn and yearning? 10 out of 10. Obviously, it is definitely heartbreaking yearning. The two tend to walk on eggshells with each other when really all I wanted was Draco to be upfront and tell Hermione everything in one go. But because that's not his style, he's trying not to overwhelm her and sort of let her get there herself. He just gives her little bits and pieces every day while they're having brekkie together. And so it takes a really long time for them to almost find that they even like each other. The story gushy and gives you tiny tummy tingles. I would say a 6 out of 10. When they do start to fall in love again or start to date again, there's certainly a situation where it feels very gushy. Moments when they are almost ready to kiss, a handhold, an intertwine of fingers, this sort of stuff that causes the tummy to tingle is definitely there, but not obviously as much as some of the other reads that I have. So above average, but not as much as I would like. And then there's smut and spice. I gave it a 3 out of 10. Yes, there is smut, but it's written in a very beautiful, methodical sort of way that is not the usual kind that you'll read in a sort of fantasy romance book where there's not that descriptive. It's like implied that they do things, but they don't actually go into the nitty-gritty details. If that's somewhat for you, you don't like to hear about all the descriptive body parts, then maybe this is perfect for you. But for me, I like a little bit more like help me visualize it by telling me a little bit more of the schmutty scenes. Is there a plot and is it well thought out? Well, I would say 7 out of 10 for me because there is a plot and a journey that you have to go through, and it ties everything together, like I said, at the very end, but as long as you can endure it. But the last chapter gives me the highest rating, is the thing that gives me the highest rating for the plot, because I think it ends so well and so perfectly. And I think from the last chapter, it just feels like everything is completed in every single aspect that you have questions on. Although at the very, very end, there is a smidge bit of ambiguity about a certain topic, which for me, I'm fine with the ambiguity. But if you want books to tell you exactly what happens without you having to think about it in your own positive or negative way, then maybe you'll find that a little bit irritating. But I think for me, that little bit of ambiguity is fine, is enough for me to still love the ending. So last criteria, is there adorable side characters? I'm gonna give this just an average rating of 5 out of 10. No one is as adorable as some of the other characters as you'll see in the other fanfics. They're sassy behaviors and they're adorable at times, but they are not cutesy where you want to like pinch their cheek and be like, oh, they're so like adorable. I want to just hug you until you can't breathe. So nothing like that. They are cute in their interactions. They're a little bit sassy and bantery, but not adorable cute, where I will explain to you further in the other books where I find them very, very evident. So overall, for my ratings, the reason why it's number 5 is because it got out 38 out of a possible score of 70 for this fanfic. Alright guys, so we're up to my number 4. This one is called Apple Pies at Other Amends by To Eat a Peach. This is the story obviously past the war. The war is all done, which most of the stories are anyway, and it really focuses on how people deal with the post-war trauma. And in this book, Hermione deals with her trauma of the war by baking, and she bakes baked goods for each of the people that sort of interacted with her. Overall, I would say this book has the least amount of plot probably from all the fanfics that I'm going to talk about today. They are about 19 or 20 years old, so they're out of high school now. They may be starting to work just in their first job. Not much has been established in their lives. Draco, unfortunately, has a little bit of a drinking problem, so if you have that sort of trigger, just be warned about that. And everyone is suffering from obviously a little bit of PTSD from the traumatic war, which is, if you are a Harry Potter fan, you would know they went through quite a lot. Hermione has just broken up with Ron because he doesn't want to talk about the war, and they've realized that he's better as a friend to her than as a boyfriend, which, you know, a lot of people do sort of agree on as well. And Hermione becomes Martha Stewart basically and bakes and gives all the war survivors a treat that she decides to make, including Draco Malfoy. That is the last stop that she has on her baking tour, and she brings him a treat and then he accepts it and then tells her that, hey, I want to learn how to cook to help him sort of stop drinking and work through his troubles. And then obviously from this, I guess, forced proximity, somewhat forced by themselves, they start to fall for each other. And that's the basis of the story. Of course, there is quite a bit of angst here, I would say, because Draco is going through it all by himself through the drinking, and he always thinks that he's not good enough for little Miss Granger. After they have a first date and Ron sees them, and he's very much anti-Draco at this point and rips into Draco and tells him how worthless he is and not good enough for Hermione, and obviously sends Draco running in the opposite direction. I think this fanfic has slightly a bit too much angst for me, but granted, they are quite young and sort of in their teen years or early adult years. There is a small schmut scene, but pretty tame. Cute banter at times, and of course cute side characters, which are generally important to me. There was this one scene in the story that I just have to mention. It was like a little bit of a weird kink or something like that. So during one of their cooking events together, Draco cuts his finger and puts it in his mouth to suck on the blood. And then another time, Hermione does the same and cuts her finger, and instinctively Draco does the same thing to her finger and puts it in his mouth and sucks on the blood. And you're like, Draco, do you have like some weird blood fetish, some weird vampire sort of thing going on? Is this some kind of weird kink that you're doing? I don't know what the point of it was, but maybe it was just like some little fantasy that the writer had for them. I don't think it's quite a hygienic thing to do. But maybe I thought it was significant because Draco used to say that her Muggle blood was tainted and filthy, and this symbolizes now that he's fine with putting her blood into his mouth, as he's no longer being prejudiced and he's not sort of racist anymore and all grown up now from that scene. Maybe that's what it was doing, I don't know, but I feel like that could have been what the intention of that scene was. All right, so because there's not a lack of sort of plot, let's quickly go to the rating system and I can talk about it there. So is there great banter between the FMC and MMC and side characters and not cliched? I would say pretty much good. It's pretty good. I gave it a 7. There is certainly banter and humor between the two. But however, because these two are quite young, they're only 19 and 20, and still they are at a very early stage of their lives, and Draco still lives with his parents, some of the bantering and the things they say to each other can be a little bit cliched and not as witty and well fleshed out as some of the other fanfic that I have read. But I did give an extra point to the banter because of the side character, Maybe. She is a sassy housewife who works for the Malfoy household. She's basically like Anna Wintour in a form of an elf because she's very stylish, but she's very direct and sometimes cutting to the words. And she's not afraid to tell Hermione that she needs to dress better and make better choices for her outfits, which later on she does help her get ready for dates. Is there humor and laugh out loud moments? Yes, there was definitely. So I gave this an 8 out of 10. Can't really remember like specific scenes or things they said. Like it's not that memorable, but at the same time, I know it was funny enough because I gave it an 8 out of 10. Story, does it have a slow burn and yearning? Yes, 8. Certainly there is yearning, slow burn because they both start to fall for each other, but neither of them know if the other is on board with it at all. Is the story gushy and tummy tingly? I would say on average it's a 5. There is gushy. There's a little moments between the two, from little glances, accidental touches of the kitchen counter, which builds up the tension, but I don't think it's as cute as some of the other ways the fanfics are written. So I didn't get that sort of feeling that it was gushy and yearning and tingly inside when I was reading it. This much is there spice? Again, 5 out of 10. There is a smut scene towards the end, but it's quite light on. So if you're used to like reading romantasy, fantasy books, it would probably be a non-significant event for you and you would think that it's a little bit too light on. Is there a plot and is it well thought out? Like I said at the start, this is probably one of the fanfics that has the least amount of plot for me. There isn't much of a plot, so I gave it a 3 out of 10. They bake to get over their war trauma and then they basically fall in love. There's some moments, obviously, when they go on dates where Draco's like, oh no, I don't think I'm good enough for Miss Granger because I'm just so broken inside. And then they sort of get over it and then they get together. So not much. If you're just wanting to hear about what they bake, if you enjoy baking, you enjoy love stories, maybe this is great for you. But other than that, I don't think there's too much mystery. There's too much, oh, will they, won't they sort of vibe. You knew that eventually they will get together. It's just when. Let's talk about adorable side characters. Of course, there is adorable side characters in this book. I gave it a 7 out of 10. There's Maybe, who is like the best side character of this book, full of sass and dresses, always impeccably well, even though she is a house elf. Now these house elves are quite liberated. They get paid. They've got obviously disposable income to buy great fashion, and you know, they're not there as a slave anymore. They have choices now, which makes it a little bit nicer for them. Then there is Draco's owl, who doesn't say anything, but he is the main correspondence between the two leads. Especially there was this scene in the book where they're sitting at a dining room table and it's a long table and they utilize him throughout the whole night to correspond back and forth from the table rather than getting up and sitting next to each other, which I don't know why. And then he eventually just cracks it and leaves the date, and then he gives Draco the silent treatment, which is so much character writing for an owl, and for a character that just says nothing but just gives little side looks and glances. I think that was very well done to make him such an adorable correspondent owl. Overall, I would say this is my number 4 because it rated 43 out of 7 based on the lack of plot, slightly immature banter, and the lack of spice maybe. Alright, so getting to my number 3 in my middle section is Hot for the Teacher. The author themselves describes this like the Gilmore Girls, and you totally get that vibe, but rather than obviously a mother and a daughter duo, it is a father, aka Draco, and his 13-year-old son Scorpius, who are the two duos that banter and have like hilarious situations. The vibe is very much a muggle story, so based on just, this could be written for any character. It doesn't have to be in the magical realm because it's not that significant except for when they're at school together. But there is not that much about, you know, magic being done. And because it is based on the Gilmore Girls, there is more drama and sassiness than magic and fantasy. So Hot for Teacher is a fanfic by Mother of Bulls that offers a humorous and romantic exploration of the complexities arising when personal and academic lives intertwine. The narration centers around Draco Malfoy, who is now a single father navigating the challenges of raising his teenage son Scorpius. It starts off the story with Scorpius confessing that he has a crush on his defense against the dark arts professor, who turns out to be Hermione Granger, Draco's former school enemy and rival. As Draco finds out about this infatuation that his son has with his ex-rival, he tries to provide some parental guidance, leading to like a series of obviously miscommunication, comic situations and awkwardness. And then obviously at the same time, because he has to interact with Hermione Granger because of the troubles that his sons are getting into by writing like secret love notes to his teacher, he then obviously is now gotten back in touch with Hermione Granger, and you find that he's starting to develop romantic interest in her. Obviously from the get-go he notices her and just like, oh well, she's blossomed into a hot lady, a hot teacher, and then things get complicated from there. Alright, so let's get to my rating system. Is there banter between the characters, the side characters that is not cliche? I think the banter is the best I have read from most of the fanfics of this nature, because it is following the Gilmore Girls writing inspired by them, and I would say it's a 10 out of 10. The author writes the same vibe of the Gilmore Girls show, the fast talking duo of Lorelai and Rory, but replace them with Draco and Scorpius, and it has the exact same feel if you have ever watched any episodes of Gilmore Girls or been a fan of that sort of genre. They are two family members, even though one's a dad, one's a mum, because they're so close in age, they seem to be able to talk about everything, and they simply go into depth about things that some parents would not go into because it seems a little bit inappropriate. Now, is the tone humorous? Of course, because it is that sort of comedy drama show, there definitely is a lot of laugh out moments. As stated before, one of the funniest fanfics I've read, very modernized storytelling, written like a popular TV show that you will see, and that tackles just everyday sort of topics between growing up, teenagers and adults and dating and teenage crushes, etc. Is there a slow burn yearning? I would say like a 6 out of 10, because there isn't much yearning in this one. It's pretty evident from the get-go that as soon as they see each other, from a physical standpoint at least, that Draco and Hermione find each other very attractive, and there's a little bit of a lusty feel from the get-go. There's no yearning, there's no like, I don't think if he's good enough, I don't think he would like me that way. It was very much like, you're hot, I'm hot, cool. But now it's awkward because your son sort of has a crush on me. What do we go from there? And they're in their mid-30s, so they're grown adults, and they've blossomed into hottie for toddies, and you know, it's time for them to, they're both single, it's perfectly okay, just how do we navigate this now? Is the story gushy and tummy tingling? I would say it's a little bit of a 5, because it is very much skewed towards the comedic route. A definite rom-com with more comedy than romance gushiness. The love is fun, is goofy, so there isn't as much tummy tingles as you would find in the other stories. Is there smut with some spice? Yeah, not bad at all. I would say a 7 out of 10. There is a decent amount of smut scenes between obviously Hermione and Draco. Not as much as some other books, because they are having to hide their relationship from Scorpius, the teenager who obviously originally had a crush on Hermione Granger, so it's awkward, so they wanted to keep it a secret for a little bit, and they can't get together while he's still around. So there isn't that much opportunity basically for them to get spicy and intimate with each other. Is there a plot, and is it well thought out? Average. 5 out of 10, I think. Of course, there is a plot, but it's very basic, because if you're watching the Gilmore Girls, the overall plots generally in an episode is quite basic as well, because there's a lot more about focusing on being funny and being bantery than making it very complex. And the magic system is basically just a little bit of a side piece. Take away all the magical world and the plot still works in this story. Is there adorable side characters? So in this story, Scorpius is a teenage boy. His bestie is Albus Potter, one of the sons of Harry Potter, and they get along really, really well. And I would say Albus Potter is one of the adorable side characters that are very likable in this book. Harry Potter's son is a great addition to this story and adds a decent amount of mischief into it. And though the two duos are very good at the side story. So you've got obviously Hermione and Draco getting together as one of the main plots. And then you've got little side characters because obviously in Gilmore Girls, the mum gets a story, the daughter gets a story. So therefore the father gets this love story, but the son might also get something that is a bit more age appropriate, let's say. And Albus Potter is there to help him on this journey. Overall, my rating for this is a 50 out of 70. Obviously it sits at number 3. All right, let's get to the juicy end. Some of my top faves now coming through. I've got number 2 and number 1 coming through. So let's start with obviously number 2 because we're in order of backwards. To Woo a Witch is a Dramione fanfiction written and authored by My Delphi. The story revolves around Draco Malfoy, a devoted single father to his son Scorpius, which is very similar to the other story, except in this story, Scorpius is a teeny tiny adorable baby, and Malfoy is a single dad while he has a little baby, and he's determined to make Scorpius's first Yule special. So Yule, I think in this story, is their equivalent of Christmas. It sounds exactly like a Christmas story. I think this is a great fanfic to actually read during Christmas time because it's very centered around that special occasion. But in the wizarding world, they call it Yule, and Draco decides that the most special, precious gift that he could give his son is a mum. And he's got his eyes set on Hermione Granger, and he thinks that she will be perfect as his new stepmother because she is fantastic with children, loves children, and he knows that she is newly single. There is a lot of mutual pining in this story. Obviously, it focuses a little bit on the complexities of being a single parent and the warmth of Christmas traditions. Like I said, great to read at Christmas time. Set in a post-war wizarding world, the story devolves into Draco's heartfelt efforts to win Hermione's affection throughout the book, aiming to create a loving family for him and Scorpius. Within this book, obviously, the author has been influenced by, I think, a lot of the great romantic comedies that are out there, because there is a scene where Hermione turns to Draco and says to him, "I like you how you are," which is very much a throwback to Bridget Jones's Diary, if you're a fan of that, where Colin Firth's character, Mr. Darcy, turns to her and says, "No, I like you just the way you are." So it's got that very cute vibe about it, and also I think there was like a little bit of Christmas theme in Bridget Jones's Diary as well, so I feel like there was a lot of inspiration from that movie brought into this book as well. You get 2 points of view. You've got Draco, you've got Hermione, which is nice to see because they both start falling for each other and you see them both yearning for each other. Scorpius in this book is the most adorable character ever and the perfect mummy trap to lure Hermione into Draco's web of love, I would say. I think this is one of the coziest stories that I've read. Something I would definitely reread, definitely something rereading at Christmas time when you've got some time off, and everything wraps up in just this perfect bow at the end and you get such a happy ending for everyone involved in it, including even Draco's family. So a lot of times in these fanfics, Draco's family are not around. They've either passed away or they're, not approving of the situations between Hermione and Draco because they are still very traditionalist and they want pure blood only. But in this one, actually very supportive of the situation, which is lovely to see. There is a little bit of Ron bashing. This is probably one of the first fanfics I read where there was a bit of Ron bashing, and I know that people love it. So if you love a bit of Ron bashing, this book will definitely sort of feel that need for it. I don't actually necessarily feel like Ron needs to be bashed in books for Draco to be good. Like in life, you don't need to put someone else down in order to raise yourself up. So I don't think that's necessary, but they like to do it in this book. The reason why you see Ron being bashed here is the reasoning for him not wanting to be with Hermione anymore is the fact that through the war, because she was tortured by, obviously, if you are familiar with the story, she was tortured by Draco's aunt, crazy aunt. And from that, she has problems having children, and he really wants to have children, and he doesn't want to have to sort of go with her on this journey. So it turns out it's like that's one of his deal breakers, and they break up, and then he quickly gets with another character that you'll be familiar with, but he then turns out to be a little bit of a deadbeat dad. So the character he actually hooks up with is Lavender Brown. If you know the story of Harry Potter, he's gotten with her before. She's madly in love with him, so it makes sense. A lot of the stories have Ron and Lavender getting together. And he knocks her up after, like, I think only 2 months after he breaks up, rather than dealing with her or trying to help her with this journey and working it through with her. He's just like given up on her and going to someone else that's very obviously fertile, and knocks her up and just comes into a rush wedding. So that's the bit of the Ron bashing there. Apparently, after she was tortured by Bellatrix during the war, the magic that was inflicted on her might have damaged her core, making the likelihood of her being able to have babies only like a 2% chance. And like I said, Ron is not for that because he wants to have children. He comes from a family that is huge and he wants to have lots of them. So Hermione is heartbroken, as we know, but not to worry because Draco is just around the corner and he's a DILF and seems to be a much more better candidate. He has an adorable 6-month-old baby, Scorpius, and he himself recently divorced from Astria because it was like a loveless arranged marriage. It turns out that Astria in this book is not so much into wizard, but into witches instead. But she was pressured by her parents to marry into a marriage with another pureblood, and Draco obviously is a very rich bachelor, and who wouldn't want to marry him? So she said yes to sort of like get that pressure off of him. The reason why they then break up is that it turns out they made an arrangement that if Astoria acts as a surrogate and produces an heir for Malfoy, the Malfoy family, Draco can break the marriage agreement and give her a load of money where she can then go live a life she chooses, which happens. But now Draco needs a baby mama, and he has obviously Hermione Granger in mind. And it turns out in this story, he's already been in love with her for the last 2 years. So that's what the whole plot of the book is. It's Operation Woo the Witch, which is woo Hermione Granger, trying to get her to fall in love with him and become the new mum for Scorpius. Simple plot, but adorable. Since he's like, and he knows because they've been friends now for the last 2 years, that she has problem conceiving, and he thinks, well, because you're so good with babies and you love babies, I have a baby right here who is adorable. So maybe you fall in love with my baby and then eventually fall in love with me, which is a perfectly good plan. And it might be a little bit ridiculous, but it's cozy and it's cute and I love it. So let's start to rate it. Before we go into the rating system, here are some sort of really cutesy moments that I want to mention. So it ends up that Hermione now doesn't have anyone to spend Christmas with. And because she's just broken up with Ron, normally she's friends with Ron and his family. Draco just has him and his baby, he says, and he invites her over for Christmas. So obviously she comes over for Christmas and they exchange gifts because it's Christmas time. And Draco presents Hermione with a carefully chosen Christmas gift, reflecting his deep understanding of her interests and preferences. And this gift was so lovely and sweet. And it definitely gives you all those tingly feels after you realize what it does and helps her with. Scorpius is the perfect sort of wing baby or matchmaker. He knows when to be adorable, when to sort of draw the two leads together by when they're doting over him, and create some really delightful scenes that's cute, lovable, and a lovely like possible family moment for the trio. There's even a scene where they even decorate their tree together and they're sharing stories, and it's starting to sort of foster a new tradition for the two found family, basically. Alright, so now off to my rating system. First things first, is there great banter between the FMC and MMC and the side characters? I would say because it's a cozy and sort of lovable little story, it's not too much banter and there's not too much banter, and there might be just a little bit of cliche. So I would say I would give it a 6 out of 10, as there was like quite a bit of gushiness between the two leads who are already friends. There isn't as much back and forth and witty banter compared to some of the other stories that I've mentioned or the one that I'm going to mention. And because in the other stories, when they're still enemies or rivals, there's a lot more insults thrown at each other. That is quite funny and cute. But because this one, they're already established friends, we've bypassed all of that. Instead, the interaction is just more sweet rather than a battle of wits, I would say. Is there a tone of humor and they don't make you laugh out loud? There is still, even though there's not bantering but between the two main leads, there is still like a great moment of humor between Draco and the way Draco interacts with her, because he's a little bit of an awkward man trying to get his woman. So I would say this is like an 8 out of 10. So there's this moment where Draco is going to ask Hermione to spend Christmas with him and Scorpius, and he practices the conversation with Hugh, one of his besties, but instead of coming off smoothly, he came across as a bit of a babbling idiot who asks Hermione, rather than just spend Christmas with him, he just blurts out to marry him. And then when she was like, what? What'd you say? And so he tried to cover it up. He goes, oh, I said, will you marry with me? Like, ha ha ha, come marry with me, like spend Christmas with me. And then try to cover it up that way, which I was like, yeah, that's cute, that's adorable. But at the same time, I feel like you're wittier than that, Draco. Is there a slow burn on yearning? Yeah, I would say there's ample of yearning. It's definitely an 8 out of 10 because you get the perspective of both people. You've got Draco, who's obviously sitting here being in love with Hermione for 2 years and had to stand back and wait for her to be single because he was obviously willing to accept that she was with Ron, and he's not going to be like a woman stealer. That's not sort of the person he is in this character. And then obviously once she becomes single, his plan of seduction had to come through. But then there's this point where they go from friends to lovers trope in here, where it takes a little bit of time obviously to get there. So you got this yearning and you got him like, oh God, is she getting the message? Oh God, am I doing a wrong sort of vibe through it? And then as obviously Hermione thinks of him as a friend, but as she's spending time with him and seeing him in a slightly different light, a bit more of like a love interest light, you see her starting to develop feelings, and then she starts to get yearnings from her side as well. So because you get both point of views, I think that's lovely that you get yearnings and slow burn between the two of them eventually coming together. But I do love the trope of when the male lead falls fast first trope, and that is definitely throughout this story. That's the vibe. Is there gushy and tummy tingles? Obviously, because it's so sweet, and because with the added sweetness of like a little 6-month-old baby, there is definitely gushy moments and tingly moments throughout it. So a 10 out of 10 for that if you're looking for that coziness. I think that is great. Is there schmut with a splash of spice? Yes, there is a schmut scene when they finally do get together, even though there's a baby in their house. Luckily, the baby falls asleep and they get it on, and it is quite spicy and lovely to read, especially after all the yearnings from both sides. Is there a plot and is it well thought out? The plot is well thought out, but it's still a 6 out of 10 because it is a very simple plot. The plot is to woo a witch. It's literally in the title. All you have to know is that the plot is, will I get the witch or will I not get the witch? And obviously being in a rom-com, generally you know the ending is going to be a happy ending one. How you get there or when you get there is probably the mystery of the plot, but you read on because you want them to get there and you want to see the adorable scenes and how it unfolds with each other. Adorable character, obviously you know based on my gushing of Scorpius, is going to be a 10 out of 10. All the points will go to him, and I just want actually more scenes with him in it. And the story is not one of the longest stories that you can read. I think it's only about maybe 200 or so pages, and I'm happy to go up to 250 pages in order just to get more scenes of Scorpius being adorable in it. Alright, so for this book, I give this a 56 out of 70. So it's very, very much up to the top of fulfilling all my wants and needs for a cozy romantasy book, which is why it's my number 2. Alright, so my number 1. So this is my first actually fanfic that I read. And the reason why I read it is because this author wrote this fanfic so well that they gave her a published book, which I've also read, where it's not a retelling of this story precisely, because obviously there's copyright issues. She cannot make it the same character. She had to change the character, she had to change the realm, but there is definitely elements of this story in this that's in the published book, which I will make a separate video about in the future. But the fanfic that I think that is the coziest, but it's also one of the longest ones, if you have the patience for it, is Draco Malfoy and the Mortifying Ordeal of Being in Love. And it's written by Bridget Knightley. And then her debut novel, which is out already, which came out in July 2025, is The Irresistible Urge to Fall for Your Enemy. This one is, I think this fanfic has been around for obviously ages. I know I'm like late on this train of getting into this book, but maybe because of the length of time and once being one of the original Harry Potter fanfics, it is very, very popular. I don't know if you can still get it on AO3 anymore because it is now she's a published author. She might have taken it down, but I'm sure there is someone that's willing to share with you the material if you try to hunt deep enough for it on the wide web. So in this story, Draco, obviously usually portrayed in the past as a bully, finds himself reluctantly falling in love with Hermione Granger while being assigned to protect her, as he's now an aura, and his job obviously is to protect the wizarding world from all dark forces, and he's very, very good at it. And she needs the protection because she is so many things in this book. She is I think a human, she sort of works in the muggle world, in the human world as a doctor. She also works in the wizarding world as a doctor, and she's also a researcher, and she's also, I think, a lecturer and a professor. And she makes a really critical medical discovery that could potentially change the wizarding world for the better. You don't know what that reason is yet because that's part of the plot, that's part of the mystery, that's what makes you read on, but it is quite important to the wizarding world. And there is obviously people, even though this medical discovery is going to help the wizarding world, there are also some people in the wizarding world that does not want to have this be successful. So therefore she needs to be carefully guarded, and Draco, being one of the great auras of his time now, is assigned to look after her and sort of protect her and put up like barriers and basically act as her bodyguard. The story focuses very much on his internal struggle with his pride and his feelings initially towards her, which is like, you know, she's an annoying know-it-all, and it creates a very humorous and often awkward dynamic between the two. Due to the nature of her project, Minister Shacklebot has assigned Draco as an aura to protect Hermione from the forces that wish to stop her from this research becoming successful, or sabotaging her, or even possibly unaliving her so that she doesn't get this done. Obviously, the tropes in this fanfic is false proximity. Draco is tasked with guarding Hermione. She can't get rid of him because she needs also the protection, but at the same time she's being told by the minister that she has to be protected. So they are forced to sort of work together a little bit. Obviously, the story has a lot of character development. The story often focuses on Draco's internal conflicts as he tries to maintain his usual arrogant facade while grappling with the fact that he's now fallen for Hermione, and he's trying to like deny his feelings to a very amusing and often repetitive sort of vibe, but it's not so repetitive that you find it annoying, but it's funny where he's always like, no, I do not like her. The narrative of this story is very humorous, and it highlights like the awkwardness of Draco's attempt to hide his feelings and the clash between his usual behavior and his new emotions. I think the story is really, really charming and smart. Even though it's a cozy romantic novel, never did I experience any cringe factors that I do in a lot of romanticies where there's a lot of cliched words between each other and a lot of sort of very obvious confessions of love. I never got that with this writer. I think this writer is very, very clever at how she banters with the two main leads, where they can express their feelings in a really lovely way without you feeling or like, oh, that's a bit like third-hand embarrassment about reading about it, which goes to show that this writer knows how to sort of write a script between two people. I think so many times we are forced to read the same lines from other male leads, describing the female lead as someone different from all the other girls. This story, of course, implies it, but it does it in a way that seems refreshing, and like other stories that I've read before, it doesn't just keep telling the audience that this FMC is amazing and is brilliant and does a fantastic job, I think, of showing us a lot through demonstrations of what Hermione Granger achieves at being, you know, a researcher, her magical abilities. And I guess the story is already established, right? In Harry Potter, we know how brilliant she is. We know that she's the smartest witch in that year level, and because of her smartness, she helped Harry Potter a lot to achieve what they did at the end of it. Like, the war could not have been won without her in it. So therefore, so I think the writer then could build upon those building blocks and you know, make her even more brilliant as we see her as she works into adulthood. I think the author is clever enough to sort of take all the traits that you get from Harry Potter and embellish it and make it a bigger deep dive in their personalities and how it develops now that they're in their 30s, I think. Draco obviously is always been arrogant, but now he's arrogant, he's witty, and he's suave. He's an aristocrat, right? Much like his father, and he's super, super rich. He comes across initially as a bit of an F-boy, a little bit of a bad boy, but now that a bad boy that's never fallen in love, and now for the first time he gets to fall in love, and I guess that's like a lovely trope where you can convert the F-boy into, you know, a gushing golden retriever, and that's sort of the vibe that you get from this book. Hermione is caring, determined, she's selfless as she is, always is, and a genius, and the book, taking much from the book and it's sort of embellished further now because she then develops obviously this amazing research and also even technology to help sort of the wizard world communicate with each other. Hermione created this device called the Jotter, which is like a texting device that doesn't obviously use, you know, internet or the Wi-Fi that we use when we text each other, but it uses like magical powers where they can send text, but it literally is just a way for them to send SMS to each other. And throughout their SMS, even chats in this fanfic, they get a lot of like really lovely scenes with them bantering each other, and you see their affections for each other grow and them yearning for each other and waiting for that person to text them back and waiting for that text to, that bing sound to tell them that, you know, they're there, they know they're there, and they're asking about each other's day, etc., where you normally get through normal texting, normal modern day life. This fanfic turned my perception around altogether, where originally I was like, that's a bit gross to see Hermione and Draco together. But as you read, if you read this one, after like 800 pages almost, 81 chapters, you like see Draco as a very much leading man character and you want him to win, and it makes perfect sense why them two will be great together. When it comes to slow burn, I would say this author is the best of the best out of all of them. There is so much slow burn because you don't ever get them even together in their first kiss till the very, very end of the story. And even the author in their notes when they're writing this fanfic has said that this is not a story for people who want quick wins. Reading this in my ebook, it's about 553 pages long, and only around page 420 did the audience get their first ever kiss. So, you know, like you had to get through so much, almost like over 80% of the story before you actually got to see them have their first kiss. It was almost painful at times to see Draco and Hermione try to squish their feelings for the longest of time in this book. So this book has 36 chapters. The author wrote 36 chapters. And just to tell you how slow you have to wait for things to happen, and if you're looking for schmut, it is not going to sort of suffice equivalent of schmut to chapters. So there are 36 chapters and only 2 chapters where it gives you a bit of a smut, and they are in the last third of the book, but the sexual tension and the accidental touches and the looks and the yearnings and the building of it is probably what will keep you maybe reading if that's the sort of vibe you like. Now, I know I'm talking a lot about the yearning and the banter and a little bit of the smut and the tension, but there is also a plot to this story. The two needs to go on quests and adventure and work together to solve this big issue in the wizarding world relating to Hermione's research, which is going to be a game changer for the world. And because there is a big bad in this book trying to stop the progress and put Hermione and Draco into life-threatening situations. So therefore, it makes it very interesting to read. Even though there is high-risk situation, because it is a cozy read, there is never a time where you think they're not going to be okay. So if you're someone that needs there to be higher risk, then you might not like it. But if you're someone that like, I don't want them to be any casualties where there is people that have importance to the story to be at risk of anything bad happening to them, then this is perfectly fine. It feels like it's high stake at times because there is, you know, bad things happening and lots of threats to them, but ultimately it reads in a way that you know at the end of it, it will be okay. Now, in addition to the obviously main story, there are a little bit of like side love stories, and there is one between Draco and Hermione's cat Cookshanks. So if you remember the cat Cookshanks that always used to attack Ron's rat because he knew he was like up to no good, Cookshank is a very good judge of character. Even though this cat is always on the verge of mauling him, Crookshank has this push and pull love with Draco, at times rubbing his body up against his leg or even sleeping on his chest with the threat of possibly trying to suffocate him in his sleep, and constantly eyeballing him whenever he was around his mistress was quite adorable. There was a lot throughout the book where you think like Draco is almost not only trying to win over Hermione, but also he needs to win over the cat at the same time. There is a funny line in it where, you know, they go on a quest. At the end of it, Granger sighs and she goes, okay, well, goodbye then. And Draco calls out Granger, and she's like, what? And he's like, tell your cat I said pss, pss, like basically pss, pss. And then in the published book, the dedication at the start of it is literally pss, pss, because it's quite significant in the book, because a lot of people actually love that line. And obviously it's a little bit Easter egg for the fans of this book. I think this book is a great choice if you want to laugh out loud. It is a long rom-com movie. And for people that don't want to go through all the setups and all the quests, literally month on month over a calendar year, you may find this book a little bit dragging and pacing at time. But I think it is an indulgent for the author, because they obviously wanted to write what they want to write, which they're allowed to. Even the author, I think, speaks French. So there is some chapters that there's like some French talking in it, and they even write that in the notes, I'm indulging in myself because I speak French and I want them to speak French, and that's perfectly fine. All right, so let's go to my ratings. Obviously, this is going to rate very high because this is my favorites, obviously, cozy Dramione fanfic. Is their banter, obviously, from everything I said, 10 out of 10, great banter. The tone is humorous, so obviously laugh out loud moments, 10 out of 10. The story has so much slow burn and yearning to the point of irritation for maybe some people, but for me it is fine, a 10 out of 10. Is there gushy moments? No. So I would say it's an average. It's a 5 out of 10 because the characters are a little bit too cool and a bit too witty to be gushy at times. So although it is funny when Draco's like trying to deny his true feelings for Hermione, he's still being a cool cat about it and not being all gushy and tingly about it. Is there schmut and spies? Yeah, obviously there is. There is, like I said, there's 2 scenes, but because the book is quite long, how can I give it a 10 out of 10 when there's only 2 scenes? If you like spice, I would expect a few more chapters of spicy, sprinkled throughout, but there's only 2 out of that many chapters, so I would say a 7 out of 10 in comparison to some of the other books I read where schmut is like a 10 out of 10 because there is just so much scenes of it. Is there a well thought out plot? Yes, absolutely. There is definitely a plot. I think it's quite a clever plot, but there is a little bit of the drag factor because the plot takes time. Like I said, because the author is indulging in whatever they want to write. They want to write you every single detail. If this book was a published book, I would think they would strip down a lot of the sort of non-important scenes in it and pace it a little bit faster, and maybe even accelerate through some of the months where the things that they were going after were not as important. So 8 out of 10 for me. Definitely good plot, definitely well thought out, but pacing could be a little bit faster. If it was a published book for a fanfic, perfectly fine. Obviously, you love what you love. Adorable characters. I gave it a 7 out of 10. Of course, there are good side characters. There's the 2 little house elves that work for Draco Malfoy, who are so happy when their masters finally get some action and get someone in his life, like potentially for a romantic situation, and they're so happy about it and overly enthusiastic. They're also very sophisticated, and they are also French and speak a little bit of French in it, and so they're like very cool cats, but they're very also adorable with the way that they try to help him along in his quest for love. Then of course there is Crookshank, who I said is a very good character, who says nothing, doesn't have to say a single word, but with his glares and looks and his mere presence and the visual banter between him and Draco are exceptional writing for this fanfic. Overall, this is rating a 57 out of 70 for this book, and that's why it is my #1 fanfic to suggest to you. I would say that if you are a patient character and you want to get everything, a plot, a very good character development, very sophisticated banter between characters, this book is for you to try as your first one. But if you're someone that's just getting into it and just like, I need a quicker read. I think Woo a Witch is much nicer. But if you're someone like me where you could never imagine Draco as a leading man and a potential for our Hermione Granger, this book, because it is long enough that and it's developed well enough that there's so many layers of the character, it might actually change your perception of him as a leading man, as a hot leading man, before you start to read the other ones. Because once I read this one especially, it was really easy for me to read Hot Shots, which is basically a one chapter story where Draco and Hermione are already together and you just see like lovely scenes or hot scenes between them, and it's much easier to believe if your mind has now changed its perception, and this book definitely will do it for you. Alright, so that is my top 5. Obviously, I'm reading more. I will talk about it. I will talk about other ones and maybe even shorter ones if you want me to. I am putting myself off the sad ones and the most dramatic ones, which I know there is a lot of out there. But if you have any suggestion of good cozy ones to read that are not too sad, because I generally don't like to read too much sad stories, please leave it in the comments below. Thank you so much for listening to my rambles. If you like these sort of videos, obviously like this video, subscribe to the channel, and I will see you next time. Bye.